Good afternoon. It's great to see so many of you here today for our webinar on tackling housing supply and affordability challenges through mixed income housing finance innovations. This event has one of the highest webinar signups we at Urban have experienced, indicating the interest in this important topic. My name is Lori Goodman, and I am an Institute Fellow at the Urban Institute. We have a great program planned for you today. A special thanks to Mass Housing for sponsoring this. First, my colleague Tina Stacy will give a 10-minute or so presentation to highlight the importance of mixed income housing, then help frame the issues. This presentation was an outgrowth of work funded by Mass Housing and released on July 23rd. We were grateful for the opportunity to undertake this really interesting research. This work included two briefs, one on the importance of mixed income housing, entitled Can Mixed Income Housing Advance Housing Supply, Affordability, and Opportunity? And the second on Mass Housing Build Program, which is a new financing model to catalyze mixed income housing. We also released a blog which looks at mixed income financing models across the country. These papers are posted in the chat. This presentation will be followed by a panel discussion moderated by my colleague Daniel Hornung and joined by a distinguished panel, which includes Matt Bedsole, the President and CEO of Invest Chattanooga, Hillary Cooper, the Director of Innovative Funding for Housing Programs in the Colorado Office of Economic Development and International Trade, and Crystal Cornegie, the CEO of Mass Housing. This panel will focus both on the need for mixed income housing and innovative programs across the nation. Before moving into this program, a few quick housekeeping matters. First, this event is being recorded and the recording will be posted online after the event. Speaker biographies, slides, and related material are available online. The chat contains a link to the event page where you can find this information. And finally, all participants are muted, but you can type your questions and comments into the Q&A box at any time. With that, let me turn it over to my colleague, Tina Stacy, for her very interesting presentation. Thank you all very much for being here.
Thank you, Lori. I'm going to pull up some slides. So excited to see so many of you all here today. Thank you for joining us. Like Lori said, my name is Tina Stacy, and I'm going to be presenting some research that was done in collaboration with Lori, with Jorge Gonzalez Hermoso, Daniel Hornung, Aniket Mehrotra, and Kate Reynolds. Okay. So why are we here talking about mixed income housing today? As I'm sure many on this webinar know, many communities throughout our nation are facing a shortage of housing, particularly affordable housing, and particularly in neighborhoods that have high access to opportunity. So things like jobs, resources, good schools, those kinds of things. So many local, state, and even federal leaders find themselves trying to address three goals through housing policy. The first being building more housing overall. The second being expanding affordable housing specifically. And then, of course, there are different affordability levels within that. And then increasing access to high opportunity neighborhoods for people with low incomes. So in this research, we set out to ask the question, can mixed income housing address all three of these goals at once? To explore this question, we looked within the state of Massachusetts, since Massachusetts has a long-standing history of supporting mixed income housing. So there we go, next slide. What did we find? I think we were quite surprised to find what we did find, which was that not only is mixed income housing prevalent in the state, but in recent years, it has actually been the dominant form of large multifamily housing in Massachusetts' largest markets. In this graph, you can see the light gray line represents mixed income housing, with it expanding rapidly starting around the year 2000. The black line is market rate housing that peaked in the late 60s and early 70s. And the blue line is fully affordable housing, which peaked more in the late 70s and early 80s. And in fact, what we found was that between 2021 and 2025, or the 5 most recent years of data we had, that mixed income housing made up 50% of large multifamily developments in Massachusetts' largest housing markets, or 65% of units. So that was quite large and quite surprising to us. Not only that, but we found that mixed income housing now accounts for most of the affordable units, or at least the most that were produced in those 5 most recent years of data. Specifically, mixed income housing contributed 56% of affordable units between 2021 and 2025. Finally, we looked at how mixed income housing contributes to this access to opportunity question. And we found that not only do mixed income developments, are they disproportionately located in high income, high rent, and high opportunity neighborhoods relative to fully affordable developments, but in many cases, they are disproportionately in higher opportunity neighborhoods than market rate projects as well. As you can see here, the variables highlighted in yellow are those in which mixed income housing tended to be in neighborhoods with higher rates of those variables. So higher median incomes than both mixed income and fully affordable and market rate units, higher median rents, meaning that mixed income housing is able to get those affordable units into areas where there are less likely to be affordable units, and down the line, including jobs proximity and higher educational rates in these neighborhoods. So what has Massachusetts done differently that's helped them to get to this point? There could potentially be many factors, but two of the most likely factors are one of Massachusetts' largest housing laws, which is Chapter 40B, which was instituted in 1969. This law requires that municipalities maintain at least 10% of their housing as affordable, or 1.5% of land area, or they are subject to what's called a builder's remedy, which means that developers can bypass local zoning rules and local permitting rules and build more easily in their locality. But the interesting part about this and how it relates to mixed income housing in particular is that beginning in 1990, eligible mixed income developments started to count all units towards the municipality's affordable housing inventory if those affordable housing metrics were met. Meaning that if I build a mixed income development in a community, even those market rate units within that mixed income development will count towards that municipality's affordable housing count to get to that 10% threshold. So this created a very strong incentive for mixed income housing. The second thing we see throughout the state is that there was a strong expansion of inclusionary zoning beginning in about the early 2000s. And by 2019, about 143 municipalities had inclusionary zoning policies or programs. So inclusionary zoning is a law that either requires or incentivizes affordable units within market rate developments. But even with this, we know that, and as with any housing policy, there is no silver bullet. It is not enough on its own. While mixed income housing has contributed affordable production in many large developments, contributed affordable production in large developments, but remains below historic levels, as you can see from this graph. And in fact, as now in the state, a greater share of renter households in Massachusetts than households nationwide are rent burdened and severely rent burdened, meaning that we still need more affordable housing throughout the state. And Massachusetts still faces a significant housing shortage overall. And you can see that even with this mixed income housing, peak development has not hit those peaks of the 70s that we saw in terms of overall production. It's estimated that Massachusetts needs an additional 222,000 homes by 2035 to meet projected demand. So mixed income housing could be one part of the solution towards these, but we know that we need to still expanding affordable housing and overall supply through other programs as well. And to continue expanding affordable housing through mixed income specifically, and to kind of spur this on even further, as we know that construction and operations costs are rising in many areas, making it even more difficult for developments to pencil out or be financially feasible. Mass Housing, Massachusetts Housing Finance Agency, has created an innovative financing model to help spur stalled mixed income developments called BUILD, which stands for Bringing Innovation to Lending and Development. We're going to hear much more about this from the panelists, but I just wanted to provide a quick overview showing you what the traditional and Momentum Fund capital stacks, the Momentum Fund through the BUILD program look like. So the BUILD program reduces financing costs by replacing expensive private equity capital with less expensive public equity capital, while also investing in subordinated debt, allowing for more debt financing and further reducing the need for expensive private equity. So how can BUILD help in the state? It can help stalled projects move forward. So some of those mixed income projects that have been dominating the market in large developments can continue to grow and move forward through innovative financing programs like this. It can help to leverage private investment into these developments, and it can create long-term affordability. So what should policymakers take away from all of this? I think what we found is that mixed income housing can contribute to overall housing production. It can produce a large share of affordable homes, and it can expand access to opportunity. We think it works best when it's paired with supportive financing, supportive land use policies, so removing exclusionary zoning barriers and speeding up all the processes that are required for construction, and then continued investment in affordable housing, both fully affordable developments and deeply affordable housing through public and assisted housing, since that's difficult to achieve through mixed income housing. So that was just a quick overview of the papers that were posted in the chat. Encourage you to scan those as well, and we'll have another blog post coming soon. But as this gives you a sense of what's possible, the next question is really, how do states make this happen? To explore that, I'm delighted to turn things over to Daniel Hornung, who will lead a conversation with leaders from Massachusetts, Colorado, and Tennessee about the innovative financing tools they're using, the challenges they've encountered, and the lessons they think other states can take from their experience. Daniel brings a unique perspective, having helped shape national policy at the White House and now continuing his work here at Urban. Over to you, Daniel.
Thanks so much, Tina. Really thank you to everybody for joining this call. It's great to see just how much interest there has been. And we're really excited, as both Laura and Tina mentioned, to have incredible leaders from around the country joining us to talk about their on-the-ground experience with mixed income finance programs. Lori mentioned this, but just very quickly, and you can see all of their bios posted in the chat. But Matt Bedsole, the president and CEO of Invest Chattanooga, Hillary Cooper, director of innovative funding for housing programs at the Colorado Office of Economic Development and International Trade, and Crystal Cornegy, the CEO of Mass Housing. And as Tina mentioned, we've had the great opportunity to work with Crystal and her team over the past several months, analyzing and describing the work that they're doing to make mixed income projects work in the state of Massachusetts. So we'll invite all of our panelists to join us and jump right in with kind of a broad question to the group, which is, and I'm actually seeing some of this already in the Q&A that folks are posting, but each of the programs that your state or city has put forward tries to fill a pretty specific market gap that exists in the jurisdiction where you are. And they're somewhat different. But one of the unifying factors are that they really do sit in between kind of the capital A affordable housing LIHTC world on the one hand and market rate development on the other. It's important to not think of them at all as replacing affordable or LIHTC. I think to the contrary, the idea is that they would work side by side. LIHTC as a kind of a complementary program, side by side LIHTC and vouchers and other capital A affordable programs. But in your own words, I'd love to turn to each of you to kind of walk through the conditions in your jurisdiction that gave rise to the idea that a mixed income program was necessary, and also um, hear kind of the specific market gaps that you think your program really aims to fill. So I will first turn to Crystal.
Thank you, Daniel. Thank you all for having me, and I love working with Urban Institute on this report. To answer your question, I feel like Tina already did a lot of answering of the question. We spent a lot of time thinking about what the data was telling us, and understanding that a lot of mixed income deals were permitted, got through the Chapter 40B process that Tina described, but weren't actually moving into construction because they couldn't get their financing together. And that was a particular period in time as well. We had just come off the run of historically low interest rates for programs. And so we really wanted to figure out how we could combine some investment from the public sector in with maintaining private sector investment and making sure that we could do something to impact the capital stack in such a way that we were continuing to have, like I said, private sector investment, but having the least amount of money invested on the public side to get the deal moving forward. And that was really um, the kind of catalyst to us thinking about what can we do to move this forward. And so while it is a great tool, has helped some deals. It is not meant to help every deal. And as you described, Daniel, it is not meant to replace all of the investment that the state does into what you're calling capital A affordable housing.
Thanks, Crystal. Let's go to Hillary next in Colorado.
Yeah, thanks so much. It's great to be here, and it's really great to be on a call with the folks in Massachusetts who are doing a lot of great work and leading the way and leading by example. So really appreciate all of your work. Um, just a couple things to follow up on what Crystal mentioned. We do have mixed income programs here in Colorado, and they are not at all intended to replace income support for the lower affordability. In fact, they are really meant to take pressure off that funding. Our LIHTC tax credits are overprescribed here. So, if we can bring that private finance into the market, sorry, then sorry about the background noise. Then and use private finance and some of the equity programs or the equity program that we developed, then hopefully we can take some of that pressure off, get more units built at the lower end, and then also units built up that scale to the middle income and where needed in those markets where the market is just not providing the middle income range of affordability. So we've got Proposition 123 was voted on by the state by the voters of the state in 2022, and it created a public equity program very similar to the program that Mass Equity that was built in Massachusetts. It is equity without ownership. The state does not take an ownership component. It is a capital investment, and it is equity with an expected equity return, but it also comes with an annual cash flow. And I'll talk about that annual cash flow in a minute, but there's a lot of questions about specific AMIs. So the state equity program was built to serve 90% AMI average. And there's two option one and option two. Option one is for those more deeply affordable units. So it's a higher percentage of the capital stack essentially, and lower cost equity, higher developer fee, similar to LIHTC, but not it cannot be paired with LIHTC. And then there's option two, which is really aimed at that mixed income more. So getting the true sort of 90% average, units above 90, units below 90. And then, as I mentioned, it comes with an equity return, it also comes with an annual cash flow. And the reason for that is because we have a tenant equity vehicle that was created alongside it. And it takes all of the, we also have a debt product, concessionary debt product. It takes all the interest from the debt product. It takes all the equity returns, including the cash flow, and it puts them back into, it gives them back to the tenants. So we give the tenants of the Prop 123 equity program all of the proceeds above principal. We return it back to them in various forms of payments, and that can be used as savings. It can be used for emergency expenses. There are no restrictions on how it can be used. It is encouraged to be used for savings to work their way up the affordability ladder, ultimately into home ownership, which is, the biggest opportunity for equity.
Thanks so much, Hillary. And Urban probably should host another webinar on tenant equity building type programs because that's fascinating. And I have a million questions that I'd love to ask you now, but we probably should go on to Matt to talk to us a little bit about what they're doing in Chattanooga.
Yeah, thanks, Daniel. So very happy to be here and learning a lot already. As someone who's already a participant in this, still learned a lot from the earlier presentations. So I am the CEO of Invest Chattanooga. Unlike our other panelists, we are city specific, and so our work is entirely within the geography of the city of Chattanooga. And I've also found some common threads as well, as a lot of this work originally was conceived through oversubscription of 4% and 9% in the state of Tennessee. So the city of Chattanooga did not have a great history of winning consistent 9% awards, and largely the market conditions in the city weren't as such where we could support 4% without a state tax credit, which doesn't exist in the state of Tennessee today. And so a lot of the effort was really driven through ways to look how to expand the pie, how to break through sort of the ceiling of production, which exists right now through LIHTC in the state of Tennessee and the city of Chattanooga. So we started that off. We also do things a little bit differently than the other panelists because we're specific to just the city. Sort of the scale of deployment of our fund is limited. It's really limited to the overall multifamily production that exists in the city of Chattanooga, which, compared to Boston or even, markets in the state like Nashville is relatively limited. We only really see about in any given year, maybe 3 to 4 new multifamily construction projects. And so with that, we really started off with a desire to invest through equity, but we take an ownership component, unlike the other panelists do. And to a large extent, we're also looking at capital needs within our submarket. So unlike maybe other major Eastern submarkets or like Atlanta or Nashville, we actually have a capital need. There's really not a tremendous amount of equity capital for new construction multifamily in the city of Chattanooga. And so not only are we bringing in desperately needed mixed income investment, but we're also just bringing in investment for multifamily in general. And so that is a little bit different than maybe the typical market. We don't have a cost issue. We don't really have, at least in the city of Chattanooga, an entitlements or a zoning issue as much as we have a capital issue. And so that is where a lot of the need that we filled our product with.
Great, thanks, Matt. And it's super interesting for me to hear, you know, some similarities, of course, between these programs, but you think about, the differences between a market like Chattanooga and then, the most extreme polar opposite on the call right now, the Boston market in Massachusetts, obviously just very different market conditions, but still, kind of a need for mixed income type programs in both. So I want to go back to Crystal. Tina had a slide up where she kind of showed the capital stack or a kind of illustrative capital stack in the mass housing program. The momentum equity, which is the below market preferred equity, the forged loan, which kind of works together. These are both, forward commitments during construction that fully come into the capital stack at stabilization with the goal of trying to unstick deals. Zooming out a little bit, though, can you comment on why it is that you need both, what it is that makes the program work for developments when you're talking to folks about potential deals, what feels most attractive to them about it, just as we're thinking about um, how these kinds of programs are useful and the way that they work, which is quite different from more kind of traditional capital A affordable housing finance programs.
Sure. I would say a couple of things. One, which is that because, as Hillary was describing, it is equity, and so there's a return. We get cash flow. It acts like regular equity, and so developers who have somewhat of a hesitancy around getting involved with government programs because of a variety of things, this starts to feel more like what they are used to doing in relation to getting investment. Number two, because we come in at stabilization, it makes getting construction capital and other capital actually a little easier because they've got a takeout, and it's kind of guaranteed from day one. If you like do things according to plan, you've got a good takeout. The other thing is that because we can, between the top loss funding that mass housing brings and the momentum equity, those two pieces, they make up about 20% of the capital stack. And so you get 20% of the capital stack at a, competitive, highly competitive rate, with another, 50% or so of your debt at that rate. And suddenly you got 70% of your capital stack at a really competitive rate, and terms. And so your deal starts to look and feel differently and able to kind of move forward. So so folks have appreciated that as well. From the programmatic side, not just from the developers, but from the programmatic side, it is a revolving fund. And so we lend you money, invest equity, we get the payback. And so it requires an upfront investment from the public sector, but not an ongoing kind of thing, right? It's like you get a couple of years in and then you're done because that starts to revolve. And that's good for developers because they then are seeing like, oh, the program isn't going to go away, right? It's like you're going to have money. And so I can think about not just the deal that I had that was stuck, but we're starting to see developers come to us and talk to us about deals they intend to do. And so that makes a huge difference as well. So I would say those are some of the big things that we have going for us related to the program.
The revolving loan fund point feels really important because I think that's one of the unique innovations of your program and some of the other programs that we're seeing pop up throughout the country, where, of course, the affordability here is shallower than the affordability of a LIHTC deal or something like that. But at the same time, the revolving nature and the shallower subsidy
Yeah.
kind of works, I think, in an interesting way where you could imagine them, the two kinds of programs working really well together, deeper affordability, deeper subsidy, shallower subsidy, shallower affordability, but revolving loan fund that enables kind of further production down the road as well.
Yeah. And as Matt was describing a little bit, like our market we live in one of the high cost markets in the country. And so our sort of affordability is at 80% AMI or below. Because at 80% AMI in Boston and Greater Boston and Massachusetts, it becomes hard for you to get access to a market rate development, market rate rental project anyway. And so thinking about that is also a shallow way to get at some affordability without actually taking lots of money away from supporting much deeper affordability, which the state does. We have a very robust programs to support very low income renters in Massachusetts, and seriously don't want to take away from that.
Yeah, yeah. Um, Hillary, you talked a little bit about the details of the Prop 123 equity track at the beginning, but interested if there are other details that you'd want to share now, and then just picking up on some of the rest of the conversation. We talked about a really high cost market like Boston. We've talked about a market like Chattanooga. I'm interested, Colorado is such a diverse state. You have a market like Denver, and then you have rural markets with very different market conditions. So interested to kind of hear an initial sense from you of where this program is being most utilized and perhaps how it's utilized differently in different kinds of areas.
Yeah, and in addition to sort of the urban, Denver Front Range, we call it, markets, and the very deeply rural markets, we have the resort rural markets, ski areas where the median home price is like around $2 million and up. So really I mean, they're essentially broken housing markets for those of us who earn a paycheck. Um, so we do have the state has been creating sort of a broad range of financing opportunities. We also have a middle income housing authority that is authorized to issue tax exempt bonds, mostly focused on middle income. We're talking about expanding the use of that to allow to cover more 50, 60, 70% AMI units as well, to again use that sort of private finance opportunity to bring, just a few more lower income that are not supported by LIHTC. So more is the idea, more at all levels of income. But one of the things that we are finding is they are very different housing markets, and then very different finance, very different capital stack needs across the state. So we have had to adapt some of the products that we have and really watch those markets really closely. There was recently Denver put an inclusionary zoning law in place, and a lot of developers pulled their permits before the law went into place. We had about 22,000 apartments that came online. And lo and behold, supply and demand truly does work when there's that many apartments online all at the same time. They were all needed, to be sure, maybe not all at the same time. The rents come down, and the market actually works. The economy actually works. So we had made some investments in some middle income projects that are going to come online in the next 2 to 3 years. So we're watching that very closely to see how those equity investments go, and being very patient. We're a very patient investor in those markets. But at the same time, in the resort rural markets, the needs are still great, and there are less funding opportunities. There's not as much capital coming in for affordable housing, and not as many developers who want to develop in those areas, because they all can develop for the $1,000, a square foot costs. So we just aren't seeing a lot of affordable housing developers in those markets. So the idea, I think, is to create really flexible capital and to really understand your state's data and needs, both at the current point in time and then also in the future, and just be constantly checking in and balancing that. And just quickly back to the conversation that you all were having about the revolving loan fund. One of the things that we're exploring here is taking another source of capital, our existing potential capital, from a fund that the state manages, and the proceeds of that fund to create a revolving loan fund, like a short-term construction loan fund. Because one of the difficult things in Colorado right now is the cost of construction. So if we can help get those products, much like Massachusetts is doing, if we can help get those products, those units, those homes for people, built, shovels in the ground, get them the affordable financing, they can start, the operating returns can start to pay off those loans. They just are having a hard time getting shovels in the ground. So just creating all those flexible forms of funding at different points in the capital stack are really important.
That's really interesting. I mean, and also, pulling out one of the things that you said, I mean, I think there's a lot of attention that gets paid to the, concessionary rate that some of these programs will offer. So, it's cheaper than the private equity equivalent. But you, I think, made an additional point there that's really important that I think gets missed, where it's just like the patient nature of the investment, and that it's easier to have some degree of longer term affordability if you're not, in an investment that always needs to get realized every 5 to 7 years, but there's an ability to take somewhat of a longer time horizon. So I think that's really interesting. Um, Matt, I go to you next and invite you to comment on any of the details of your program. But one of the things that I was interested in pulling on a little bit here is the nature of your program where um, the Chattanooga program kind of retains a direct majority ownership stake in some of the projects, and would be interested to hear you talk a little bit about that, the rationale, how it works, and the benefits associated with that approach.
Yeah, thanks, Daniel. So I'll return back to something I spoke to earlier, which is sort of the bespoke nature of our investment model. We have a smaller submarket. Um, Similar to mass housing, our original conception on this is around 20%. So we invest around 20% of total capital costs into a deal. But our investment vehicle is split up between what we call the Housing Production Fund. That's around three-fourths of volume of our investment that's intended to recycle over time. It is revolving debt. But then about a quarter of our investment is common equity. And so this is equity with ownership. And, you know, part of what I think we're allowed to be able to do this is because of the small total scale or volume of our investment. And I can take a direct role in negotiation. But once we make these investments, we are a part owner with our private development partners. We rely on the entrepreneurial spirit of a lot of our for-profit, nonprofit development partners to bring us and source us deals. And typically those deals have some form of capital need that we can fill. But once we've made that investment, we are an owner, not just an owner, we're a majority owner. So on paper, we have a 51% stake at a minimum in the projects that we invest in. That also comes with certain amounts of ownership rights associated with it. We're not really hoping to partner with people because we want to operate the building or we want to build the building. That's what we're relying on when we initially make that investment, is that we're doing a good job of sourcing our partnerships. But there are about 6 or 7 different key items, primary first of those, which is affordability, that we have a unilateral right to control over. And I'll go back to our permanent affordability fund, which is what we call our common equity investment. When we invest that into a project, it's really intended to stay there indefinitely. That investment will realize cash flow returns. It'll realize both operations and then through capital events. But for the most part, it's a sunk investment that could be there for 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years plus. And that is our intention. Once we invest in a project, we hope to own that indefinitely. That also helps inform how we make our investment decisions. So it's a little bit different than how normal investors, when they invest in a project, they're maybe looking at a 5 or 10 year life cycle. We're looking 20, 30 years out. That informs how we build our projects. And surprisingly so, it's been fun to see this from especially our position. It's something a lot of sponsors are interested in participating in. Not all sponsors are attracted to our model, but enough have been where we've been able to close at least 3 different partnership structures so far. That is based off of a long-term partnership and participation between the sponsor and Invest Chattanooga. I'll mention another thing which is interesting about our model, and it's this was something Crystal alluded to, is it allows, to a large extent, when sponsors work for us, they only have to source one capital partner. That's a really big part of this, and it also makes negotiation between us and our sponsor much more elegant, where we're not having to deal with multiple different LP sources of capital, all with different requirements, timeline requirements. But the only reason we're really able to do that is in the state of Tennessee, we also have access to a program called the Community Investment Tax Credit Program. And so that is an interest rate buy down tax credit that is it's provided at the state level, and it's a write down for lenders on their excise and franchise tax, and it allows us to access it even in this market right now. Senior construction loans up to around 75% LTC. And so when you combine that very attractive low rate construction loan program combined with our 20% capital, we can get up to around 95% of total capital needs within a deal. We ask our sponsors to bring in that final 5% to match our sort of our common equity position. But that's what we've relied on, and I think it's very unique. I don't know if you could scale it up at the state level, but you'd have to figure out, at least organizationally, a unique structure to be able to allow for the type of decisions and really streamline to be able to make this work, because you can't be sitting on a decision multiple days in if you're an equity owner in a project, either during construction or operations, which jeopardizes the performance of a project, which is, not all government agencies are able to do that. But I think for us, we've really found a nice common ground, and it's blossomed in, I think, really productive working relationships with our development partners.
It's really interesting, Matt, because in that answer, I think you talked both about some of the ways that you kind of foster partnerships with private actors to make it kind of seamless and easier for sponsors and developers to work with their capital stack in a simpler way. But you also talked about, some of the pretty involved sourcing and negotiations that you guys directly are doing in your office. So I'm interested, if there are folks on the call who work in city halls elsewhere or in governor's offices elsewhere, and they're thinking about starting a kind of revolving loan fund type program, how would you advise them on that question of what's the expertise that you need to have in your office? What is the kind of degree of partnership and delegation to the private market that you should be engaged in? How do you think about that trade-off?
Daniel, I'll take that. It's a good question. I would be as brief as I can, but I could talk at length on it. I think having a small, streamlined organization where your board and your staff have really easy direct line of communication is very important, because any major investment decision we have is governed by our board. We have a 5-person board. It's directed by or appointed by our mayor and our housing authority. We're a subsidiary of our housing authority, but it's a relatively small board. I have close relationships with all of them. 3 of those board members are in real estate investments or development. And so I rely a lot on them to, take a temperature of a certain amount of investment. But I'm also the only staff person in our organization. I have outsourced our legal and accounting through our housing authority. I've worked very closely with our city hall staff on policy, but when it comes to investment decisions, it's me that's negotiating. It's me that's actually sitting down and writing those policies. And then I have a direct relationship with my board. I think that can be done when you have a relatively small scale, which is the city of Chattanooga. I think if you were going to blow this up, I think at the start is you have to have a streamlined board and a relatively small staff. I really don't think you can do this or need to do this with a staff beyond maybe 3 or 4 that can really drill into those investment decisions. And we take a lot of our cues from private equity shops. I mean, when you talk to private equity staff folks or investors, they often brag about how small their organization is, not how large their organization is. And that's something we've taken from the top, is to really do this nimbly, and to also realize that the type of efficiencies, both from our return perspective to keep our fund active, is that you have to have a small staff and to really make this make sense.
So I just want to jump in because I agree a lot with what Matt said in terms of capacity, right? You gotta know how to underwrite these deals because there's real risk here. Um, we at Mass Housing, we're the state's housing finance agency, and we lend about $1.3 billion annually, using taxes and bonds. And so, we have some familiarity with underwriting uh, multifamily deals, but these are really different because they're predominantly market rate deals. Um, so, um, so you got to have the capacity to do that. And because this is not all we do, like, this is a small part of what we do. We do the most kind of oversight of the Chapter 40B mixed income deals in the state. And so we're very familiar with that group of developers, with that process, understanding how that works. And so, we've got a lot of different parts that we associate with. Even in our lending that we do, with our bond lending, we do that, we're portfolio lenders. And so we've got about, 900, 1,000 units under our portfolio that we manage. And so we're able to manage these investments as well. So I think more important than size is capacity. And so if you're in a small shop, or you intend to have a small program, then and doing that in a place that isn't necessarily um, in the seat of the political office probably makes the most sense to find some other partner to kind of do that with, because it is really different than running government and developing policy and that kind of stuff. So I would give that advice to people to think about what other quasi-public agencies can partner with a municipality or a state to actually kind of do this program.
It's so interesting because there's this importance of moving nimbly and moving effectively on the one hand, but on the other hand, you make such an important point, Crystal, that we're talking about the need to basically underwrite market rate deals and both get them done, but also protect taxpayers and ensure that state money is being used effectively. So that's incredibly important. Just a reminder to everybody to please uh, type any questions you have for the group into the chat, and I'll try to filter some of those through with our next 11 minutes. But two final questions. First, for you, Hillary, I'd love to ask about how you think about the kind of interaction between these kind of financing programs and the regulatory side of things. We haven't really talked about regulation yet. So, how programs like these um, can work either effectively with, zoning, permitting, uh, other reforms, or, ways that those kinds of regulations can otherwise hinder the important ends of a financing program like the ones we've talked about here.
Yeah, thanks, Daniel. That's a great question. I think, simple answer is all of the above is needed. I mean, here in Colorado and many states throughout the country, we do have a housing crisis, and some might say we have an economic crisis as well. And of course, all of those things make it very difficult. Here in Colorado, we also are a very strong, if not the strongest local control state. So sort of statewide regulatory approaches are not often welcome at the local level. This particular leadership that we've had for the last 8 years has been very strong and progressive in its policies to increase more housing supply at the local level through zoning reforms, parking reforms, and sort of fast tracking entitlement processes at the local level. But it has been a challenge, and some of those local entities are choosing to kind of fight the fight instead of figure out how to build more housing. So I think it's a constant compromise. All of the above is needed, and one of the things sort of outside of the scope of your question is, but something to consider is that every single funding source that you create at the public level has its own set of sort of regulations, compliance, enforcement requirements, applications, whatever. And California recently did a study that every public funding source costs about $20,000 a unit, each public funding source in the capital stack. So we certainly don't want to add to the cost of building affordable housing by increasing, our financing options. We're doing good by increasing public financing options, but if it's adding to the cost of housing, we're sort of kicking ourselves. So one of the big efforts that we're doing here in Colorado is to kind of bring all the funding partners to the table, public and private mission-aligned investment, other private investment, to see, how we can make our public programs more flexible to attract that private finance and combine the access, make it more accessible for developers to have sort of a single access point. It's very difficult. This call I just got off, there's a lot of technical challenges to take something after you've built it, and sort of pull it back and simplify it. But that is one thing to keep in mind as we continue to add these funding sources and bring private or mission-aligned capital in. How do we still keep it affordable for the developments, affordable both in time and money for developments to access those funds?
Thanks, Hillary. We in our urban research on the mass housing program, one of the things that we reference very briefly, but that I see as an exciting opportunity and kind of this nexus between regulatory and finance programs, the MBTA Communities Act, the law in Massachusetts that encourages towns and cities to build more housing and build more multifamily housing near transit. I think those kinds of statewide reforms are really interesting, kind of natural partners for these kinds of programs, because it's often the case that mixed income housing can work particularly well in those kinds of transit adjacent areas. And of course, we know that there are just so many benefits, housing, but beyond housing in terms of economic opportunity associated with living near transit. Crystal, I'd love to go to you for the last question from me, which is, as we think about kind of how these kinds of programs could scale, interested in your perspective on, should we be thinking about a national, program that learns some of the lessons from the programs on this call? If so, what would that take? If not, why not? And then picking up on one of the things that I just saw in the chat, in particular, is there certain kind of support from the federal government, either Fannie, Freddie, federal home loan banks, otherwise, that could be particularly useful on that front?
Sure. I absolutely think that part of the challenge that we have as a nation is that market rate housing doesn't actually work for enough people anymore, right? And so you've got the Joint Center for Housing. Their recent report talks about how folks that are making over $75,000 a year, which is a lot of money in some markets nationally, are really at the point where they're now rent burdened, right? And so it's like, so we have a market condition that doesn't actually work for enough people. And until we get to a place where that's true, I think that is the point of government intervention in the market. I think that there are lots of ways that you could do it. You have three similar but different ways that we're talking about here. But some of the key features are, you've got to be thinking about, how you're making investments into deals and not necessarily subsidizing them. Because when you look at what gets built in the country, about 10% of the country's units are affordable, capital A, affordable. And so you really are talking about a market intervention if we're going to have anything that happens to address the housing crisis. And that really has to come from the federal government. And you can have a program in which I personally like the GSEs for this, Fannie and Freddie, because they are supposed to be creating, liquidity in markets, secondary market capital, and think about how things revolve and that kind of thing. And so You could do low interest construction loans. You could partner with each of the states to figure out what it is that works best in their state, because real estate is still real estate and location still matters. And so really thinking about like what works in Colorado doesn't necessarily work in Massachusetts, doesn't necessarily work in Chattanooga. And so you've got to think particularly about how to make those investments and what you can do. I want to say another unique feature about Build is that it was designed to have co-investment. And so to have private market invest with the public sector into deals. And so, and so we can, price our equity in such a way in which we can make private actors get a return alongside of us. And so part of what's going on again across the country, we have a housing crisis, and particularly in Massachusetts, we hear a lot of companies talk about how this is an economic development challenge and they want to help, but no one knows how to help, right? And who has the kind of money that Amazon has to create that kind of fund in every state? And so this is meant to be a way in which we can have private companies making investments alongside the public sector to really get deals going so that we have, workforce level units that are happening across the state. So I think we have to have federal investment if we're going to really have significant resources to address our national housing crisis. And this is experimenting, or whatever you want to call it, is just one of the ways in which the federal government can make a choice about this.
It does seem that one of the really important things about your model and some of the other examples we're starting to see around the country is this idea of how do you get private capital to the table that is not philanthropy on the one hand. That's not a criticism of philanthropy. That's to say that we need more than just philanthropy, but also is not the kind of real estate private equity that must earn 20% IRR and must do it on a 5 to 7 year time frame. There has to be something in between to get, I think, the unlock that we need in so many markets around the country to help on the housing front. So I'm trying to look very quickly in the chat here. One of the themes that I've seen a couple times is this idea of inclusionary zoning and whether inclusionary zoning ends up being one of the keys to getting mixed income deals done. One of the folks in the chat commented that in North Carolina, where inclusionary zoning is illegal, you almost only see LIHTC or market rate, really nothing in between. So curious, and this is for anyone who wants to take it, how you think of the role of IZ, inclusionary zoning here.
I can jump into that. Think about that a lot in our office because we're managing that program as well and making recommendations to the governor's office. The way that we're looking at it is we've identified a selection program that's really looking at the local job markets and local economic development opportunities, especially in rural Colorado. That's sort of where the emphasis is on for inclusionary zoning under this the 2.0 program. And so where are those places where we can attract more investment to build more housing supply quickly, that both keeps prices affordable because the supply increases to keep prices affordable, and also helps support those job markets to, get the sort of economic development opportunities happening in those regions and for those regions to be more self-sufficient. So we have had a lot of discussion about pairing public financing resources and attracting opportunity zone funding to pair with those public resources. But we're looking at it more as a market-driven solution, which in turn, we've got a pretty substantial program that is trying to build Colorado into one of the top markets for innovative building technology. So trying to drive demand for innovative building technology, so modular, panelized kit, even 3D. We're very interested in new technology here in Colorado. So really driving demand to those factories to help those factories sustain and grow, and in turn having them produce affordable units that can be built really quickly in some of these communities and attract opportunity zone funding to both those factories that are producing the units and to get the units built in those communities. So we're seeing it as a plus up and not a way to pair with our already limited public funding sources. We're trying to attract more funding and not limit the number of units we have. So that's how we're doing it here.
That's very interesting. And the building technology topic is probably also a good topic for a future urban webinar. A lot to unpack there. Well, we are over time, so let me just say a tremendous thank you to Hillary, Crystal, and Matt, both for their comments and interesting presentations today, but of course, more importantly, for the amazing work that they're doing to further the cause of housing affordability in markets around the country. Thank you to my urban colleagues, Tina, Lori, Aniket, and Kate. And thank you to all of you for joining and your interest and your question on today's call. So thank you so much.